Who's that guy in that orange shirt? Who must be the fence expert? It's almost time to talk about the fences. It's time to discuss operations and expenses. It's really time to elevate small businesses. It's time for Joe to drop his knowledge. It's relentless. This rhyme of mine is getting a bit ridiculous. Here we go. We're live with Joe. Enjoy the show.
Vince Fam, welcome back. Thank you for joining for another live Ask the Experts, or rather Ask the Experts live Q&A. Pretty sure that's what we call this thing. Appreciate you guys tuning in for sure. If you guys are listening to the podcast, you're listening to a recorded version of a live conversation I host most every Saturday. And I say most every Saturday because we're getting ready to take a couple weeks off. We're going to go visit our good friends at Nationwide Industries, followed up by a family weekend. So appreciate you guys joining us this week. Like I said, if you're listening on the podcast, recorded version of a live conversation, hosts most every Saturday. Starts around starts at 10 a.m. Central and lasts about an hour. Sometimes more, not often less, but sometimes more. If you'd like to weigh in on the live and have your questions answered live, check us out on most every video destination. So YouTube, Facebook are the two primaries. LinkedIn's in there as well. I think Instagram's we're pushing through to Instagram, possibly. I don't know. YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, top 3. Come check us out there for sure. Hey, guys, if you're in the chat, if you're watching live, thank you for tuning in and taking time out of your Saturday to stop and chat. I think we have a great chat lined up. Andrew and I talked a little bit before the show and about what's going to come, what we're going to talk about. And I think it's important. I really do. I think there's a lot of business owners that don't have a solid plan, and they need to have one. Before we get into that, first and foremost, thank you so much to Stain and Steel Experts, Expert Professional Wood Care Products, for sponsoring the live. As always, great people, great friends. If you're using a stain or maybe thought about using a stain product, you should absolutely reach out to them. They're a sponsor because we're a client. We were a client for quite a while before they came on as a sponsor. This brand that I personally really believe in. We use it here at the business most every day. We're pre-staining boards most every day around here. So anyway, great product. It's the stain that doesn't sink. I like it a lot. Guys, with that being said, like I said, if you've read the description, if you've watched the show before, you know Andrew. Let's bring him up and give him a hello. Andrew, hello.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm well. How about yourself?
Man, couldn't be any better.
First and foremost, thank you for taking time out of your Saturday morning. I know Saturdays can be tough sometimes.
It's my pleasure, man. I'd rather be doing this than a lot of other things.
That's true. That's true. Like, I'm not mowing right now, so that's
win.
Right. That's a win.
That's right.
Andrew, if anybody that's watched the show has likely seen our conversations revolving around finance planning, just things to think about on the business side of running a business. But for the few people that may not have seen the show before or not familiar, could you give a brief introduction?
Sure. So I own Atlas Financial Strategies. We're a fee-based business planning and financial planning firm. And so in the context of business planning, one of our kind of overarching messages to business owners is getting and keeping the business what we call sale ready, even if you never plan to sell it. And the reason is there's a lot of things that go into having a sale ready business, but even if you never plan to sell it, having a business that is sale ready means that it's valuable and marketable and growing and profitable and less dependent upon you as the owner, which should speak to the soul of a lot of business owners. And anyway, it's just kind of more well ran. And then, if you do plan to sell it, it's not like selling a house. You can't slap some lipstick on the pig and put a sign out front and say for sale. It's usually, ideally, a multi-year process to really get the business where, number one, to have a meaningful impact on growing the value of the business, but also if and when you go to sell the business, there's a due diligence stage where they're looking back at multiple, 3 to 5 years worth of financials and all sorts of data that if you've been doing things the way that you needed to up until that point, that will go a lot more smoothly than some of the things that we've seen.
Sure. Absolutely. Andrew, would it be fair to say that probably contractors in general, but specifically fencing contractors, the majority of their wealth is tied up in the business or is at least associated with the business?
Yes, sir. So I would say just like you said, business owners in general, I think it's something along the lines of like 80-something% of business owners, 80-90% of business owners have 80-90% of their wealth in their business. So we see, and that's why our messaging being what it is, keeping the business sale ready, because also 80% of businesses never sell. Of those that do, it ends up being around 3% that sell for anywhere near what the business owner hopes to get and without a bunch of contingencies. So for, everybody in here presumably is a business owner, the majority of them, everybody knows how much blood, sweat, tears, sleepless nights, sacrifices, things you got to do to own and run a business. And so, for people who have spent years or decades pouring themselves into their business, to not be able to cash out and capitalize on that at some point is extraordinarily sad. So, I mean, if you can't, so what that means, if 80% of businesses never sell, that means that 80% of people who have spent years or decades running their business basically immediately lose the majority of their wealth. Right. And it just is extraordinarily sad and should not be the case. And, is kind of an easy fix. You just got to be, begin with the end in mind, be intentional, seek help, whatever that looks like for you. But it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, but I think people come by it honestly, right? That 80%,
Sure.
Meaning that, so they start out, maybe they start the business themselves. Perhaps they bought it from a family member, but let's say they start themselves and find success, right? They churn for several years, churn, start to see success. Rather than take profits, they put profits back into the business, which is, I agree with that, right? That's a great way to scale.
Yep.
But by not taking profits and putting them into the business, that the hope, maybe you don't know, but you hope that those profits that would have been small before turn into large profits later. They just grow inside the business as a business scales.
Right.
And so, but that's always the finish line is always over the horizon, right? It's like, hey, we just got to get there, guys. It's going to be a marathon, but one day, we're going to get to the finish line. I'm going to retire. The kids are going to be great. We'll never work a day in our lives, that sort of thing. And so profits just keep getting put into the business. God forbid something happens, right? So that race is cut short before they get to the finish line. Maybe it's health related, or who knows what the what if is, but they never get to that day of selling. And so now the scenario I'm envisioning, and the one I have a friend who's gone through something like this, is, life is cut short. And so then the family is left wishing that some sort of plan had been in place for them to maybe extract some of those profits that dad had put into the business all these years, blood, sweat, tears, that sort of thing. Because, as you said, a business, you don't just put a for sale sign out front and then somebody comes by and goes, oh yeah, that looks about like something I want. It's usually, and especially if the business owner, the guy who ran this business or gal who ran this business for a number of years, isn't around to answer questions on why it was this way or what is where, that sort of thing. That can be a heck of a process for a family who just went through, in this scenario, just went through a tragedy.
Yeah. And that's, there's 3 reasons that we, talk to clients about getting and keeping the business sale ready. And one is because, most businesses don't sell on the business owner's timeline, right? So there's either you get an unsolicited offer that you weren't expecting, and either it's ready and valuable or not. Or you think, I got 10 years left in me, and you get 5 years into that 10 years and go, you know what? I'd sell this thing yesterday if I could. And again, either you've done what you need to do to make it marketable and sale ready and valuable and all those things, or there's a health event or a death of an owner, and it needs to be sold because of that, which is, one of the things that we're going to focus on today, I believe, is the succession planning. So, that's one of the core tenets of having a sale ready business, is not only, looking towards the future and what your exit strategy is, but also what happens to the business if something were to happen to you, if you were to leave the business. We're all going to leave our business one day by either accident or design, right?
One way or the other.
Right. So hopefully by design, hopefully it goes the way that we want, but it could also be by accident, where we've run into this a lot of times. And I know you and I briefly, talked about before the show that, your friend that had gone through something like that. And I'll never forget. This was years ago. This was earlier on in my career, before we were really working with business owners the way, in the capacity that we are now. But I'll never forget, a lady called the office. I say lady, she's 30-ish maybe or something like that. And she calls the office. She needed some help with some things, and I could hear young kids in the background and stuff like that. And so she kind of laid out to us. She was like, well, my husband recently passed away. He owned a business. That business was the sole source of income for our family. I don't work. And so now I'm having to try to figure out how to, not only be a mother to our 3 kids, but also figure out how to run this business that I've never been involved in and don't know what to do. And, ended up having to sell their house, move in with her parents, and it just wasn't a great situation.
Yeah.
And so, we just run into that sort of stuff all the time, unfortunately. And again, it's kind of I mean, nothing replaces a person.
No.
But as far as financially, those are fixable problems.
Yeah, I bet that particular family would give anything to rewind the clock 5 years to put a plan in place that, hey, listen, hopefully we don't have to bring this plan book, this playbook out for another 10 or 15 years, but here it is. Here's who you need to contact to help you run this playbook. And you should be able to start on page 1. And when you get to the end, this thing is ready to go. And it's been a somewhat straightforward process on your end. I bet they'd give anything to have that playbook.
Well, and I'm sure the husband who passed, if he would have, thought about these things ahead of time, and again, if he could go back, I'm sure, he's rolling over in his grave thinking of the problems that we work very hard, right?
Yeah.
We sacrifice, we work very hard to be business owners. We do a lot of things that we don't want to do to make things happen for our employees, for our family, all those things. Yeah. So, I mean, we work very hard to make sure that our family is provided for, but are we negligently missing what happens to the family and the employees and my business and all these things where the majority of our wealth is?
Yeah.
Am I leaving them a problem that I work very hard to make sure that they don't have problems, right?
Sure,
so
absolutely.
Like with my planning, with all the things that I have in place, like it brings me a lot of comfort to think like, all right, I've set things up in a way that if something happens to me, they are financially squared away. And my wife, with the things that we have in place, like my wife would literally have to try to screw it up, right? For things to go awry.
Yeah.
And so, I think just because we don't stop and think about, or we don't like to think about that these things could happen, I don't know there might be multiple reasons why we avoid this subject.
Sure.
But I think it's something we have to kind of stop and think about and plan for, or if that were to happen, one of the lasting memories that they'll have is like, well, dad and husband really left, quite the mess for us. Yeah. And I'm sure he didn't intend to, but he did.
Sure. Left us to kind of pick up the pieces.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'll share a story with you. So a buddy of mine a number of years ago went through this. His dad started a business when he was incredibly young, maybe before he was born, but a long time ago. Blood, sweat, tears, raised the family and raised the son in the business. There's 2 other siblings. They just didn't have an interest, which is fine. I mean, they went off into different areas. Son worked with his dad, and I'm sure the understanding, whether it was talked about or not, was that son would one day step into this business. But he was in his 30s. His dad was, 50s or 60s maybe. His dad unexpectedly passes away. And so mom and dad were no longer together. So dad was on his own. Dad kept the business, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Well, now there was a will, but it didn't really, it talked about like personal things, like what to do with the truck and the house, but it didn't talk about what to do with the business. So the business gets split between 3 siblings. So now they're in a predicament that the son that has been in the business for what feels like all of his life now has 2 other co-partners in this business who don't work in a business. They don't understand how this particular business works. I'm sure they understand business in general maybe, but the day in, day out, the day-to-day struggles or the needs of the business, they're just out of touch with because they're in these other areas. And so when they have these meetings, he's talking about, hey, we need to grow in this way, or we have this problem. Here's how we need to fix it. Well, now he almost has to convince these 2 siblings that this is the direction we need to go. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, it comes to a vote and they don't agree. And then he's stuck going, then he has to go back to his team and say, well, I know we needed a couple extra vans to do service out of, but not going to be able to do that right now, or whatever the scenario is. And to your point earlier, I bet his dad is rolling over in his grave saying, hey, I built this thing to sustain you guys, to help you, right? And now it's if it's causing tension in the family, it's the business is suffering because of it, because it's really being held back, just not intentionally, but because these other two siblings just aren't familiar with how this particular business runs. When we were talking about succession earlier, that came to mind of, like I said, I bet his dad would have given anything to have at least sat down with somebody to say, hey, here's the high points, here's what you need in place, here's how, whatever, here's the bare minimum, and then we can build on that foundation over a course of years so that maybe it is sale ready. Maybe the son that's in the business doesn't want to buy that particular business, whatever. Or in this case, God forbid something happens, and at least there's a clear plan of, I want you to take care of your siblings, whatever, however that looks like in life, but
Right.
the business stays intact with you at the helm, and, that sort of thing.
Well, and so again, that might seem there's a number of things to unravel there. So one, I'm lack of planning, you're creating more problems for your family, like you said, and you end up straining, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants their kids to not get along. Everybody wants
Sure.
their kids to get along.
Yep.
But now you put them in this position where it's like, well, I've created this point of contention with them.
Yep.
Where I'm creating reasons for them to not get along, right? And creating these problems for them.
Yep.
And now you have one child doing 100% of the work for a third of the profit. The other two, who, a lot of times we find that, the siblings or whoever that are own part of in that scenario, own part of the business, who aren't directly involved in it, they're just looking at it as a piggy bank, right? I just want to continue to get money from this. But also, because they're owners and not involved, they are sharing in the liabilities of the business that I assume they don't really understand.
Well, they do to an extent, in that's some of the arguments is they say, we're not going to take on no more debt. We're not taking on any more liability. We're going to maximize profits. To your point, they're like, hey, this is what Dad would want. Dad would want us to be taken care of, and this and that. And the one that's in the business is going, yes, but he wouldn't want that done at the expense of the company. And you mentioned earlier, which I think is a great point, and the team members within the company. Right. So as business owners, I mean, I obviously have my family to think about and to take care of, but also we have 14 other families, right? 14 or 15 other families here with spouses and kids, many kids that, so it's not only my family to think about, it's also what happens to them. And that's what this friend of mine goes through is, I understand you don't want to grow because that means taking out loans to buy vans in this scenario, but if we did that, then here is the path to increase profitability to where the vans actually pay for themselves through service calls and things like that. So, but the other two say, no, we're not going to take on any more debt, no more liability that we can, and maximize profits to where it's a good idea if you can get it to work. But
and here's basically what happens if when a business owner unexpectedly pass away. And then I would like to kind of use that case as like a case study and kind of outline some things that maybe they could have put in place to kind of fix that.
Yes.
But basically what happens is, Joe, I don't know if you're the sole owner of your business or businesses or not.
I am.
Okay, let's say you are. So you die without a proper plan. What's going to happen? Your employees, your family, and your customers, right? So your employees are going to go, all right, do we show up to work tomorrow? Or, who's signing our paycheck? Are we in a sinking ship? Should we look for greener pastures? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
So if they kind of feel like things aren't steady, you're going to have some people jump ship.
Yep.
Your customers are going to say, all right, well, we hired this company to do this job for us. Is it going to get finished? Do we get a refund? What happens? Right. And then your family, generally, again, without proper planning, if you're married, your spouse will usually be the one who inherits your business. And your spouse may or may not be, in the place where they're the best one suited to run the business. And so again, now you've kind of created this problem. And a lot of times the spouse is going to say, all right, well, I don't know what to do with this, so we're just going to sell it. And again, without proper planning, and if it's not sale ready and all these things, then it's probably, not very sellable, because if you're like most business owners, a lot of the business relies upon you. And once you, randomly exit the business, it's not going to be worth what it was with you here, presumably, right?
Yeah.
So now it was worth X, and now it's worth half X, right?
Sure.
So, there's, to your point, like there's just so many things that you gotta, think about and put in place. And I will say, and this is, I mean, no disrespect to any of our attorney friends or CPAs or anything like that, but we just kind of find that a lot of times, to formalize this in legal documentation, you need to see an attorney.
Yeah.
So an attorney will a lot of times, like, for lack of a better way, kind of just spit it out, right? So kind of just, all right, hey, let's get this documentation done to make sure that this thing happens or whatever. But they don't necessarily, or at least the way I think about it, they don't necessarily spend as much time going through all the different scenarios and really spending time with the client of what's important to you and your family dynamics and what do you really want to happen and so on and so forth. And they're just kind of, hey, I'm not doing the planning. I'm just putting the legal documentation in place.
Yep.
Right. And we just find, for the few clients we've ever met with that have any kind of, anything in place, it's just not, legally it's upstanding and it's fine. But as far as the planning aspect of it, we just find in our minds that there are things that just haven't been thought of or haven't been articulated in the documentation. So I just think, again, I'm not saying it has to be us, but I'm just saying work with someone who will go through all of those things with you as thoroughly as possible to kind of, uncover, turn over every stone, look at cross all the T's, dot all the I's, all those things to make sure, like, all right, not only have we thought about everything, but now we see an attorney and put it all in documentation and things like that. But, like I said, I wanted to kind of use that case as a case study. So, because we run into this is, it really, at some point, I'm going to write a book about family businesses and all the different, complexities and potential problems and things like that. Because it is so often the same story over and over and over. Just with different names, it's just the same situation over and over. So with that particular one, very common, right? Dad started the business, owns the business. Son is, the son that you mentioned, your friend, is in the business, been in it for a long time, probably been very integral to the growth. He's the heir apparent. He's, it looks like going to be the one to take over the business. You have the other two siblings that, like you said, not involved with the business at all, probably don't really want anything to do with the business. That's fair. So there's a difference between fair and equal, right? So a lot of people think that, like, well, I got 3 kids, I'm going to split everything in thirds and everything just goes to them in thirds. And because it's equal, it's fair. Well, it might be equal, but that doesn't mean it's fair, right? So in that case, having the son who is involved with the business, running the business, and will take it over when I leave, splitting the business in thirds between the 3 kids is the epitome of unfair. It is equal.
It's equal, but not fair. Yeah.
Right. So now you've created this problem. So there's one of, the kind of easiest solution that I can think of. So one of a couple things. One, he could set it up that upon his passing, his son would, he would gift the business to the son that's running it, and then figure out, if he has other assets or other things, split that between the other 2 kids, get life insurance or do so, find another way to do that. If he doesn't have other assets, or if he doesn't, whatever, he's like, I just have this business and it's going to be split between my 3 kids. What he could have and probably should have done is basically, upon his passing, his son gets the business, but his son has the capability they all effectively, it's like a buy-sell agreement. So like they all kind of inherit their third of the business, but then the legal documentation points out that, like, hey, the son that's running it is going to have the opportunity to buy you guys out. he has first right of refusal. You inherit the shares, but basically he is able to buy you out, and there's no, now here's all the, all the things to think about there. Here's how the business is to be valued. So either we're going to have a third party valuation done, or there's going to be some sort of valuation, metric calculation, something that we're all going to kind of agree upon. Or if you're going to have a third party valuation done and there's disagreement on, what the third party valuation does. All right, well then what's the tiebreaker, right? So the business will pay for another third party valuation, and the two siblings that aren't in the business will pay for another. So we'll have 3 valuations done, and we'll average the 3, and that's the tiebreaker.
There you go.
Also, so that way, and then Dad could have done a number of things for the funding mechanisms, because also, how we're going to value it, but how we're going to pay it. Because if the son involved with the business doesn't have the kind of money laying around to just write them checks after they've agreed upon the value of it. So just for nice, easy numbers, let's say it's worth $3 million, and everybody's shares is worth $1 million. Well, the son might not have $2 million laying around to be able to stroke checks to the other parties. So one of a couple things, Dad could have purchased a life insurance policy that would pay out and meant to, or son could have purchased it on him, or business could have purchased it on him. There's different ways to do that, but basically the funding needed to be able to facilitate that buy sell would get paid right when it's needed upon his passing in a tax-free manner, that then the son can write checks, to the other kids. And now he owns 100% of the business, but the other kids got the value of the business, right? So they still got their third, but instead of continuing to keep, their shares of the business, but if he couldn't qualify for life insurance, or whatever life insurance he got, the business value exploded and it wasn't quite enough to pay for the rest of the business. You also need to have some contingencies in there of like, all right, well then, if the funding mechanisms, if there's not enough cash there, obviously, the son could go out and get a loan from a bank and do it that way, or they could do an installment sale, where the other siblings basically carry the note. They sell their shares to him. He owns the shares, but they carry the note. They carry the loan for it, and he's going to pay them back over X period of time. So with that, you need to outline how the interest is going to be calculated on those loans, because there has to be interest, and it has to be tied to the applicable federal rate, the AFR, at the time of his death, or at the time that note is created. And then over how many years, right? Because again, all these things are things that these people could disagree upon, that could throw a monkey wrench in all this. So it needs to be formalized in legal documentation ahead of time. And everybody sign their name to it and agree ahead of time. But how long and with what interest and all those things. Now, the catch to that, ideally, the son is able to write them checks, whether he gets a loan or whether it's the life insurance or whether he has savings or whatever it is, because that's the cleanest. Everybody's done. He doesn't have to make payments or any of those things unless he were to get a loan. But if he does an installment sale, they're probably going to want their money over a relatively short period of time, 5, 10, maybe 15 years, something like that. So if he's got to pay them $1 million, over a 10-year period of time, that's 100 each. That's 100,000 plus, 100,000 a year plus whatever interest.
Plus the interest,
Right. So that's $200,000 a year he's got to pay. So then that is risk to everybody, right? So what if he can't pay? And even if he can pay, what does that do to the cash flow and the growth of the business over that 10 years? It's definitely going to hamper, growth and investment back into the business if he's got 200 and something grand going out every year. So anyways, you just want to, that's a pretty, while the problem seems relatively complex, the solutions are often way easier than I think people think. Like you just gotta sit down and think about all the ins and outs, put pen to paper on it, formalize it in legal documentation, and then don't set it and forget it. Revisit it every couple years, at least every 5 years. And the reason we say that is because life changes what we think we want to happen at the time. right? Whatever we think the plan is, that might change over the
Yep.
period of time. The business value might change, and the funding mechanisms aren't enough anymore, so we need to update that. Or maybe the laws have changed, a little bit, or again, maybe what we think we want to happen has changed. And
Yeah.
a
Goals
lot
can
of times,
change.
right? A lot of times, people put together this documentation, and it was done years ago, and then they hire us, or something happens where it needs to be, they look at it again, and they're like, well, I didn't know it said that, or like, oh my gosh, like we need to change that. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's why you look at it periodically, right?
Yeah. And not right at the if you're at an end, if whatever your finish line's coming up soon, and that's not the time to revisit it and go, hey, right at the end, let's make a bunch of changes, because potentially that's something that gets questioned in court of like, okay, what? So no, to your point, regularly evaluating and making changes based on goals. Like I said, goals can change, or
Yep.
family dynamics can change, or any of a number of things
Yep.
can change in the situation and affect how that goes. Let me ask you a question. And this could very well vary by state or whatever. And let's preface this by please consult a professional. This is not advice, right?
Sure.
Like we should have said that at the beginning. This is not
Sure.
like,
Sure. Right.
This is not financial advice. This is not legal advice.
Right.
Consult a
Consult your
professional.
team. Right.
But so gifting it. So in this scenario where the father gifts the company to the son upon his passing, and then there's, like you said, ideally two life insurance policies that make the siblings whole, and then everyone's good. That's about as close as you get to the fair and equal
Right.
scenario. Aren't there tax implications on the son for receiving that gift of whatever that company's valued at?
So it depends on how they structure it, but you're allowed to gift a certain amount in your lifetime. So there's the annual gift tax exclusion, but then there's the lifetime gift exclusion. So this is another important point, because the number will change here at the end of next year. So right now, and I don't remember exactly what it is, it's something around $23 million.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, sorry, 26 or something like that. I think it's like 13-ish million per person for a married couple.
Yeah.
So I think it ends up being like 26 or something like that for between the two of them, that they're able to pass along without estate taxes and things like that.
Okay.
Now that was doubled with the Tax Cut and Job Act. That was the Trump tax cut.
Mm-hmm.
Now that will sunset, which means go away at the end of next year, unless something is done. So I'm sure it will largely hinge on how the election goes this year, and what the Congress looks like. And there's all sorts of things that could happen. But point is, that will basically be cut in half, and it will be $6-7 million per person, which is probably $12-14 million, something like that, for a married couple. Now that includes everything that you own: any properties, any cash, any investments, business interest, life insurance, if not done correctly, right? So, let's say you had a $10 million net worth and you had a $5 million life insurance policy. Well, again, if not structured correctly, that life insurance policy counts towards that estate as well. So now your estate's at 15 million, and over that,
and you exceeded
what? Well, yeah. So point is, we work with a lot of business owners. So, we worked with a gentleman here that his business is worth tens of millions of dollars. And he's got a lot of other things going on. So, his net worth is probably, 50-ish million or something like that. The guy's relatively young. He's in his 30s. So the guy's done very, very well for himself. But he's got an estate tax issue and doesn't realize it, because in his mind, he's not necessarily thinking of the business as part of his estate. And it's like, brother, your business, that is the largest part of your estate.
Yeah, absolutely.
'Cause when I asked him his net worth, he said something, whatever the number was, but I was like, that seems extraordinarily low. And so as we got into it, he wasn't counting the value of his business, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, I just think that's really important for people to understand understand, and that's another thing that, again, a little off topic, but we do
Sure.
business valuations for our clients every year to update the value of the business. And so that's something that a lot of business owners don't track and don't fully understand.
Sure.
And there's so many reasons to understand the value of your business, from a succession planning standpoint, from an exit strategy standpoint, from an estate planning standpoint, from insurance and asset protection. Like, there's so many reasons to understand the value of your business, but very few people do.
The current value, not the expected value, maybe.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Could you get into, and this is just me thinking, could you get into having like a trust situation where the trust is the owner of the business? Hell, that's probably not. Well, anyway, this is a reason to consult a professional, but because you hear, and I'm thinking about this because a friend of mine has a trust that owns guns and silencers and things like that.
The gun trust, it sounds like.
Yep. And his son is a member of the trust, and so should something happen to him, the son becomes the owner of the trust, and it basically inherits all of this. But there's some stipulation there where it's not really an inheritance, only because it's a trust, and there's multiple members of the trust situation.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak in generalities.
Yes.
Right. Yep. So there's different types of trusts that work different ways and all those things. So again, consult your professionals.
Absolutely.
But generally speaking, there's really overarching, again, and being general, there's a couple different reasons to consider a trust. One is bypassing probate to make sure that things aren't caught up in probate and goes to whoever the way that you want it to, without without the extra expenses and headache and all that of probate. Another one, so I think what you were referencing is, since he doesn't technically own them because the trust owns them. So the trust is an entity or a person in the eyes of the law, right? So the trust owns that, whatever's in there, money, business, real estate, guns, whatever, the trust owns it, not the person, right? So that's why it can basically pass to the son, but the son doesn't own it, the trust does, but see, he still has access to these things, right?
Yep.
So that's another thing about a trust, is that from an asset protection standpoint and things like that. So this is something that we talk to, almost everybody about. So, even people who don't have like complex, even non-business owners or whatever. So if you have kids, whether they're young children or adult children, I think most people would like to leave their kids something.
Yeah.
But the fears generally are, I don't want to spoil them. And if they're still young, or maybe even if they're adults, I'm afraid they're going to be irresponsible with the money.
Yeah.
And the third thing that maybe the average person doesn't think about, but professionals might generally think about, is the protection of those assets. Because let's say that your children are adults, or let's fast forward to where your children are adults. Let's say that they're in their 30s or 40s or whatever, and they're responsible, they're smart. You have no fear of spoiling them. You have no fear of them being irresponsible with the money, any of those things. And you left them $1 million with life insurance or your business or, whatever. You left them a bunch of money. Well, now that money is legally theirs and is exposed to their risks of bankruptcies, lawsuits, and divorces, which is a 50-something% risk, right?
Yeah.
So, if you left them $1 million life insurance money or whatever, well, now that money can be split in a divorce, or if they were to get sued or file bankruptcy or any of those things are kind of up for grabs. So again, different types of trusts that work different ways, but if left to a trust and if done correctly, the trust owns it, not them. They have access to it. It's for them, but they don't own it and should be protected from those risks, right? So, and you can get as creative as you want to get with when and how and under what circumstances they have access to the money. So we've seen trusts where, like, we have a client whose grandfather set up a trust for the 19 grandkids, and his stipulation was, if you want your part of the trust, you have to have a 4-year college degree. So out of 19 grandkids, all 19 got their 4-year college degree.
Yeah.
So that was his way to impart his value of education onto them, and that was his kind of stipulation. I've seen trusts where the beneficiaries have to pass a drug test every time they want money from the trust. I've seen trusts where, one of the things that we taught to clients, just things to think about, is like, kind of using maybe the Rockefeller method is one of the things that we talk about, but without getting into like funding mechanisms and how the trusts are set up. I mean, one of the things that I like the concept of is, things like, hey, we'll pay for your we'll pay for your education expenses, but not living expenses while receiving your education. And the reason that that's important is I have an attorney friend who has a client who's in his 70s and has been in college for the last 50 something years because somebody set up a trust for him that would pay for his education expenses and living expenses while receiving his education. So, which I'm sure was not the intent. So he's been living off the trust, right? So, things like that, things like, hey, we'll pay for a 20-30% down payment on your first home. Sure. But you got to be able to, a nice leg up that not a lot of people have. Yeah. But you got to be able to afford the other 70-80%. Yeah. Certain percent, certain dollar amount if you want to start a business. Mm-hmm. It could be, if you do so much community service per year, you get so much. Anyways, you can get as creative as you want to get with it. Sure. But then that fixes the problems of spoiling them being irresponsible with it. Yep. And the protection of that money. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, where did I hear that? You hear people talk about the different people's situations or whatnot. Sure. One guy had an annuity set up for his kids in a trust. And it did the same thing, like you said, with it was basically for any big purchase. So like a house or a business or whatever, it would match funds. So to say, hey, whatever funds you bring to the table, this,
we'll double it.
I'm a fencing guy. I don't understand how annuities and all that works, but there was a chunk of money in this thing that was a large sum. But that was the idea is if you bring a match, whatever you bring, the fund will match it. But so to your point, we're not blowing it. Yep. Right? We're not just being crazy irresponsible with it because you have to bring a sum of money, but also takes care of the kids, right? Yep. Because that's, I think when you talk to parents, that's the goal, right? Is to take care of the kids, to leave better to the kids than you were left, or to whatever to improve their lot in life, however that looks to you. But to bring this back around, failing to plan and not setting things up, you could actually not only not improve their lot in life, but you could also bring a significant amount of stress to them while they're trying to figure out what all the pieces are left and where they're at.
Man, we've seen, again, everything's fine till it's not. So everybody thinks that like, oh, my kids get along great and all that, but like, money does weird things to people, man. Sure. And weird things to families. And I mean, we've literally, and I mean, there's just, I mean, you could look up just case after case after case after case of families being basically torn apart. And people not talking to family members, not talking to each other anymore, or any of those things because, there's been this, whatever it is that happened and sometimes one of the things we talk to clients about too, as part of their estate plan or succession plan, is what's called a letter of intent. So this is basically a non-legally binding, basically sometimes we call it like a financial love letter to your family, right? Because sometimes even if you do have things set up the way you want them and things are going to go smooth and all that, sometimes because the lack of communication. So I feel like most problems with relationships stem from lack of communication of some sort. Yep. So just kind of, a lot of parents, I think, and it might be generationally or I don't know, but, maybe they're just a little tight-lipped about their financial situation or about whatever. And I'm like, no, because I mean, even if y'all die and you have all the things in place and things are set up and this child gets this and this child gets this or whatever, there's still going to be, without the context, without the explanation of like, here's what I'm doing and why. So sometimes even adult children need sometimes just kind of that financial permission of like, because sometimes there's this guilt, like I got this money from dad's death and it feels dirty and I don't really want it, or I don't know what dad would have wanted me to do.
I think that's the big one is what would he have done with it? Oh, maybe he would do this or maybe he would do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, and, let's say that, uh, you know, one child gets the family farm and one child gets the business, right? Something like that. Without the context of why and all those things, I think there's going to be that, well, why did she get this? I wanted that,
Yeah.
right? Or whatever. So I
Yeah.
just think that communication.
Well, the dad thinks it is fair and equal. Hey, here's, but maybe he doesn't express it. And so the kids say, well, wait, my view of fair and equal is this and this, and maybe they didn't take into account something just completely out of left field. Yeah, a letter of intent, just to say, hey, here's my thought process. Here's what I would do with it. If you were going to consult me at a later date, this
Yep.
is kind of how I would think about it. I mean, live your life. Don't get. I think that's the thing. Is I was having a conversation with my dad a while ago about our company and about like the direction it was going, and so my granddad started the business, and so that's a large part of it. Is like what would he want
What would
done?
granddad think? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If he were to walk in the door, what would he think and how would he think about it? And and my dad is basically like, listen, you are thinking way too far into this. Is he would want us to be successful and in a way that we deem success, right? He would want us to be happy. He would want the family to get along and all of this, right? So we're checking the boxes. So I think he would be incredibly happy. I don't know. I was just trying to consider like this new direction we're looking at going. I was like, man, that feels far afield from what he originally had intended. You know what I mean? And my dad's point was like, listen, you obviously didn't know your granddad well enough, because he would have done what made him the happiest and what made his family the happiest and financially what made the most sense. If it doesn't matter if roofing and guttering was the thing that he thought would lead there, we would have been Ozark roof and guttering or whatever it is. Like fencing just happened to be what he was getting into and what he found success with. So the letter intent can help with that, right? To just say, hey, here's kind of what my thoughts are. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's maybe how the future might look, I think, but also to your point, maybe giving permission of, hey, I want you to be healthy and happy and live a full life. Whatever those three things mean to you, that's what I would want.
Yeah, it could do one of two things or both. It could either kind of be directions on here's what I would like to see you do, or again, just kind of that permission. So like I have a letter of intent set up for, my wife and family, because, my wife, stays home with the kids. She used to be a chemical engineer, but, she's a little blissfully ignorant of what we do or do not have going on. And that's the way she wants it. And that's fine. Sure. I try to include her, but she, anyways, but, point is, I know that if I, something happened to me and I left her a bunch of life insurance money and I left her investments and savings and the business and so on and so forth, I don't want her sticking $5 million worth of life insurance money in the bank because she doesn't know what else to do with it. Right. So, and that's exactly what she would do. So when I brought it up to her, she was like, yeah, that's exactly what I would do. So I put together, a 3-part plan as part of the letter of intent. Like, hey, part A, I'd like to see you take this amount of money and do these things with it as detailed as I can possibly get. Right. Okay. Here's the professionals that I would like to see you contact to help, that I know and trust, that can help you with part A. Part B, same deal. Here's here's what I would do. Here's part C. So, 3-part plan, professionals to reach out to, all the things as detailed as I can possibly make it. She doesn't have to do any of those things. Right. But it brings me a lot of comfort to know, like, hey, if it were me and I were still alive and we just had this thing happen, this money dumped into our lap, and I'm saying, here's what I would do. You don't have to do those things. Right. Consult these professionals that are, or whatever. But, but also, kind of that financial love letter of, here's what I would like to see you do, or here's the context, or here's the financial permission, or something like that. Yeah. Another part of an estate plan that isn't part of a formal estate plan, but we think is very often missing, is what we call a master file. And it's basically everything in one place that somebody were to need if you were to pass away, because it's very good to have a estate planning document. It's very good to have life insurance policies and bank accounts and investment accounts or whatever you got going on. all of these things are fairly meaningless if people don't know that they exist or where to find them.
Yep.
Right. So
That's fair.
like and I could share a ton of stories with you, but like our COO, Megan, her mom passed away several years ago, but her mom's sister, her aunt, said something about like, I'm pretty sure your mom had a will, but I don't know, I'm not sure. And I wouldn't know where to find it. So they end up like a lot of people do. They rummage through her mom's house, looking at every piece of paper, through every drawer, trying to figure out what she had and what she didn't. And so Megan ends up calling 40 to 50 attorneys in and around the area. Here's the situation. Here's my mom's name. Do y'all have a file with her name on it? Still to this day, has never found it. Doesn't know if she had one, whatever the situation was, right? So if she had one, it did no good, right?
Yeah.
So, point is that master file, copies of estate planning documents. I have a life insurance policy here. Here's the insurance company. Here's the account number. Here's the beneficiary listed. Here's the person to call. Bank account, same deal. Investment, whatever you have. All those things in one place. And then, as you can imagine, like that's a living, breathing document. Like that needs to be updated too, because it's only good if it's up to date. But that way, you have a copy. Whoever has to deal with your stuff, if you were to pass away, has a copy. Sure. And then one of your team of professionals, your CPA, your financial planner, whoever has a backup copy as well, that everybody knows, hey, this person, if you can't find our copy or whatever, they have the most.
This is your point of contact.
Right.
So what we did, and not saying good, whatever, just our version of that is, so our lawyer is a friend of mine. And so my wife knows, like, listen, here's the number, you know him, but here's his cell phone number in case you don't have it. God forbid something happens to me. You call him, tell him whatever happened, and then at that point he's gonna take it, right? He's gonna kick off whatever he needs to do, and because like there is a game plan of sorts, like probably not as detailed because I'm guilty of thinking the finish line is over the horizon. So I'm like, all right, so we've got life insurance, so wipes out whatever debt, and Josh knows all this. The lawyer knows all this, but it's like, so you need to, because my wife is much the same where she's like, listen, is it handled? Yeah. Okay. Like, well, no. You need to know like what happens. Like, no, I just need to know that it's handled. And well, I don't think so because think about it. I mean, there's going to be high emotion, high tension, depending on what happens, but like,
sure,
it's hardly ever a happy time, right? Where people are thinking clearly and that, it's just a disruption to their life that they're trying to figure out how to cope with. So as many, just thought steps that you can take out of it, to your point, you have a document. Okay. No matter what emotional state you're in, start at one and see how far down this list you can get. And then when you hit a roadblock, here's some professionals to reach out to that I know. Maybe they can help you with whatever roadblock you're in or whatever that looks like to you, I guess.
The weird thing about financial planning is statistically, financial planning is a woman's issue because they're going to typically be the one left kind of holding the bag because our wives are probably going to outlive us, right?
Yeah.
Statistically speaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And again, statistically speaking, the men are generally the ones that are, handling all the stuff. And I just want, if there are any women listening, and I'm throwing myself under the bus as well as the rest of the men, but like, does your husband ask for directions? No? Is he just gonna, you know what I mean? Like, if y'all are lost, is he going to stop and ask for directions, or is he just going to?
We'll figure it out.
Drive around for a little bit, right? So, what ends up happening? We've seen it all the time. And we've seen it on good and bad, right? So, I mean, I'll never forget, this was years ago at a client that dad passed away. They were in Delaware. I actually made the trip up there to meet with them and mom and stuff like that. We're sitting at their kitchen table. And the mom, she's in her 70s. And, the dad left a couple trusts and, millions of dollars. Anyway, they're in, financially, she was fine. But I'll never forget her saying, kind of, with tears in her eyes, she was like, I can't help but feel, what's the word that she used? Basically angry with him because she was like, I'm taken care of, but like he didn't share any of this with me. He hid all this from me and never let me in on any of this stuff. So all this was a surprise after his passing, which, and then we've also seen it on the other end that like the wife thinks like, oh, everything's taken care of. He's got it. And then, he dies. And then she's like, oh,
Yeah.
Now what? Right.
Sure.
And,
Absolutely.
Really left in a not good financial situation like that. Lady that I told you earlier, her husband died, 3 kids.
Yeah.
She's left holding the bag with this business, and it ended up not going well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So talk about just making sure everything's up to date. So I was in a networking meeting recently where the insurance agent had said, hey, guys, just want to make sure everyone understands you need to update your insurance beneficiaries regularly. So he had the misfortune, whatever, to delivering an insurance, or he had an insurance policy on an insured that did not go to this person's wife, but went to this person's ex-wife. Because when the policy was taken out, she was the wife. But then it was just never updated. And he was like, let me tell you how uncomfortable that talk is, like sitting in a living room going, I know, but like whatever you choose to do with this after I give it to you, up to you. But this document says you're the beneficiary. So this is how I have to operate. So I guess that goes in with make sure you revise your plan periodically, whatever periodically means to you. But because just like, just your family life may change, a lot of things can change in a period of time.
Yeah. We worked with a lady again years ago, young, 30-ish, maybe late 20s, early 30s, something like that. They had a young daughter, 5 or 6, I think, and he died. And they, not a great situation. He had a little bit of life insurance through work. He had his 401k. His 401k went to his ex-wife because she was listed as beneficiary, and his life insurance went to his parents, which she ended up having to move in with his parents, right, with their daughter, because she made very little. She didn't. Anyway, and he didn't have very much life insurance. He didn't have very much in his 401k, any of that. So again, really bad situation. But yeah, she got virtually nothing of his, right?
Oh.
So the money from the life insurance, obviously the parents,
sure,
but like,
sure,
but
again, talking about intent, like I bet if the day before whatever happened, if someone had asked him, hey, would you like it to be spread out this way, or would you like it to go to your wife? He would have said, no, all to the wife, and then she can decide like what happens with it.
Yes. Yeah. We, and I get it, man. Like, business owners, the most valuable use of your time. So first of all, the thing that you probably enjoy the most, and the most valuable use of your time is spent running and growing your business. It is not spent, it's like, I'm sure every business owner on the call, I hope, is working with a good CPA. Why do you work with a CPA? It's not like you can't learn the tax code. It's all public information.
Sure.
Right? You could go learn the tax code. But is it the most efficient use of your time to learn the tax code, keep up with the changes that happen every year and all those things? No. So you hire a CPA who is presumably doing that for you, and you pay them to do it. Right. So, the most valuable use of your time isn't, like there's so many little rules and things that seem counter to like what we would consider common sense. Like, well, wouldn't it just happen this way? And it's like, well, presumably yes, but also no. You got to make
it's not actually maybe it's the way it should work, but it is not the way it actually works.
Right. So like we have a buddy, and again, father-son business, not to get into details, but I remember, when we started working with him, we were having a conversation about succession plan and this and the other. And dad was president, son was vice president, and the dad was under the assumption was like, oh, well, it's just going to work the way like it would for the United States. If I died, he's the vice president, he just becomes the president, and he, it's like, well, no, But anyway, so yeah, I just think, having a team of professionals you work with or somebody that
Yeah.
you know and trust or whatever that's kind of minding those details for you, because again, it's just not the most efficient use of your time.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
to stop and think about, okay, am I, first of all, what are the rules on this? Second of all, are we doing it in a way to follow the rules that's going to accomplish what we want to accomplish? It's people get bogged down by it, or they avoid it, or they don't know that, I couldn't tell you how many times we bring something up and people are like, I would have never thought to think about that. And that's like, well,
Yeah.
we just don't know what we don't know. So
That's fair. That's fair.
working with somebody you know and trust who can mine those details for you would hopefully help eliminate these problems
Sure.
coming up for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Maybe keep them from becoming problems.
Exactly.
Just have a plan for it so that when it comes up, say, this is the plan for this scenario and this is how we're going to run it.
Yep.
Andrew, I know this is a conversation that's much longer than an hour. And not
Sure.
just this succession. Like, succession is one part of it. Now, an important part, albeit, but
Right.
one part of just the overall managing a business, right? We've talked about that you need to be able to value it. We talked about, obviously succession plan. We've talked about a lot of different facets. Is there a resource so if someone wanted to learn more, or if someone wanted to, or has heard this and said, you know what, I do need to, here's some things I've got figured out, I think, here's some things I don't know. Is there a resource for those people, or is there a way that they can get tapped in, whether connecting with you or otherwise?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Obviously, anybody listening, if they feel like you need help with anything, you can reach out to us, and we can have kind of a conversation of, what what do you need our help with? Here's how we would work with you, all that sort of stuff. Kind of a free consultation, if you will.
Okay.
Now we also have a video on our YouTube page. Now it's like 36 minutes long, but I kind of go through all of the bullet points of things that we help business owners with and explain each one. So that's an easy way for people to kind of get, I say easy, it's 30-something minutes, but as thoroughly as possible, be able to, figure out like, all right, well, what does this guy, help business owner? What would he help me with? I kind of go through all those things. But also we do free quarterly business planning workshops. And so each quarter is about something different.
Okay.
Our next quarterly workshop will be in July. It's July 23rd at 11:30 a.m. Central.
Okay.
And there's the link there. You can click that link. You can sign in, or you can register.
Okay.
Just in case nobody's ever done these webinars before, like you have to register in order to receive the link to actually join. So like if you click the link and register, you'll get reminders periodically from Zoom.
Sure.
We'll email you reminders periodically because it's not till kind of late July. It's, a month and a half away or so. But with this particular one, so again, each quarter is about something different. So first quarter is like know your numbers, understanding the difference between margin and markup, understanding, your true profitability, cash flow management, things like that. Second quarter is generally around taxes and such as that. Third quarter, I'll kind of read off, so we're going to talk about how to effectively hire employees, how to distinguish the most efficient use of your time, how to decide who you need to hire next. How do you know if you can afford to hire somebody, hiring an assistant, defining your hiring process, hiring top talent, employee compensation, employee retention, key employee protection and retention, creating standard operating procedures, and the importance of tracking data. So all that is going to be kind of jammed into a 1 hour long free webinar. These are live. These are not recorded. It won't be after. It's just easier from a compliance perspective for us to be able to, we just do them live.
Okay.
So again, with this amount of time, with a month and a half, hopefully, if you click the link and register, hopefully that's enough time for you to be able to schedule some time over lunch that day and be able to join us for it.
Absolutely. Well, and talk about some big subjects. I mean, and subjects that a lot of people are talking about right now. Where do you find good people? How do you bring them on? How do you keep them? How do you, I like that you're talking about key employees or key team members. how to properly compensate, how to protect, that sort of thing. And these are all massive conversations for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, and so we try to, and so if you can join our email list. So if you sign up for this, we'll include you on our email list. So every quarter when we do these, you'll get the email invitations and things
Okay.
like that. Because again, every quarter is about something different. So we
Yeah.
try to break up, things where we can dive deeper into various subjects as opposed to being very broad and generalized about a lot of subjects. So that's what these are for. So I mean, if you're if the business is not at a point where it makes sense to hire us or somebody like us, and you just want what I hope is some good information that's helpful,
Yeah.
these things are free. You just got to make time to do them and join us for them. But again, every quarter is about something different, and hopefully it helps you with the business.
Well, and gives you some things to think about, right?
I hope so.
Especially, there's so much to this, and the quote is real. You don't know what you don't know,
Right.
right? And so if you can at least get input on it, or at least, hey, here's some key things to think about when thinking about employee retention or
Mhm.
compensation, whatever. Yeah, it's huge. And you said so it's free to attend. You just need to
Free to
register.
attend. Yep. You
Okay.
just got to register. It's free, but again, it's not recorded. It'll just be live. So you gotta make time to be there.
You
if
have to
you
be
can.
there.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Very good. Very good. Andrew, if someone would like to reach out to you directly, how can they do that?
Yeah. So I'm pretty involved with like some of the fence Facebook groups and stuff like
Okay.
that. You can
Yep.
find me in there. You can reach out to me personally. Obviously, there's our website, atlasfinancialstrategies.com.
Okay.
You can go there. All of our contact information is there. You can reach out to us. But yeah, I just want to make sure. And so I'm happy to, if people have, and even just quick phone calls, right? So I don't try if somebody's like, hey, I just have something I want to pick your brain about, or I need some help with. We're not going to charge for it. I couldn't tell you how many times we do stuff like that where it's like, hey, sometimes people just need like a 15, 20-minute phone call or 5-minute phone call or whatever it is. Just like, hey, I got this thing. I just want a second,
Sure.
kind of professional opinion on this thing. And I couldn't tell you how many guys we've done that for. And I hope they found it very helpful. But again, like, we're just happy to be a resource, man. We've found our way into the fencing industry, and I'm so grateful. God works in mysterious ways, but we just kind of by happenstance found ourselves in the fence industry, and I've met a lot of really incredible people through that, and just a lot of really great dudes in the fence industry, and it's been really cool, really neat to be a part of it, and it's really interesting to see kind of the energy in the industry right now, man, and kind of the glow up, or I don't know, right?
Yep.
It's at a really cool point in the fencing industry, I think, just from the outside looking in.
Yeah, the last 5 to 10 years have been really pivotal in fence professionals, right? So I think, and it's still changing. It's still, I think, improving and moving forward for a variety of reasons. But
Right.
I think we're in a good point right now. I think it's fun to watch. I mean, the fence industry of my dad's time is very different than the fence industry that we're in right now, in terms of just cooperation and openness. I mean, obviously technology is helping this. You and I can have a conversation with a host of people in real time that couldn't have happened 15 years ago, 20 years
Right.
ago. So technology is definitely playing a role, but I also think it's just it's personalities. It's just an acceptance that we're better together rather than apart. 1+1 equals 3 sort of a thing is if we
Right.
can team up, then generally we're both better for it. And we've got great professionals from outside the trade coming in, such as yourself, that say, hey, we want to help you. I have expertise that I think that you can use and can make both of us better, right? In talking about succession plans, it's what's the quote? I mean, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, sort of
Right.
thing, is an
Right.
easy way to think about it. But subjects like this may not have been, they likely weren't ever addressed 20 years ago of What are you doing with it? How are you valuing it? What are you thinking about terms? All of this? What's your plan look like? Who has your plan? All of this is something that wasn't talked about. So I think you're part of, and professionals like yourself outside of the industry coming in and helping the industry, the owners, the company owners within the industry. I think you guys play a part of that as well, just helping us to think about things we've never thought about before.
Yeah.
And help guiding us down a path that would help us accomplish the goals that we set out to obtain.
Well, man, and you got things like the FWA, which has been an incredible, I would imagine, resource for a lot of people in the fence industry, and the AFA and things like that. So I got to speak at an AFA event in February in Connecticut.
Yeah,
I'll be speaking at the FWA event in Vegas in September. So if any of y'all are going to be there, I'd love to meet you. If anybody's listening, if anybody wants to come introduce themselves, I would love to meet you. Right. So I'll be there and hope I get to meet you in person.
Very good. Very good. Guys, I think you at home watching, and whether you're watching live or watching this as recorded live or listening on the podcast, I think you'll agree with me where I received a ton of information and a ton of knowledge that at least I had like expectations. I knew kind of where this conversation was going into it. I can't imagine you guys sitting at home or watching this. You'll likely rewatch it, as I likely will, just to try to pick up on tidbits I had missed out on. Guys, I hope you got a tremendous amount of value. I know I sure did. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Andrew, thank you so much. Again, spending time with us on a Saturday morning I know is never easy, and just bringing a wealth of knowledge, to the viewers and to the industry.
Man, it's a great honor and pleasure, and I really, I think this is maybe my third or fourth time being on, but I mean,
Yep.
it's so much fun every time and such a pleasure. And I really can't thank you enough for, holding a slot open for me and letting me come on.
Of course, you're one of a group of individuals that just have you've got a standing link to say, hey, I'd love to have you on, because every time you're on, you bring new value to the group. I appreciate it, and that link will always work for you. It's just because conversations like this that, again, I know I found valuable, so I know other people out there found it incredibly valuable as well. And like I said, it's very well received, and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Guys, appreciate you giving us your time. Again, for the next 2 weeks, there will be no live show. I will, if you're listening to podcasts, there'll be previous versions of live conversations that I've had. So the next live show will be in 3 weeks. Can't wait to see you guys there. Appreciate you guys tuning in. For myself and for Andrew, we thank you for watching. And remember, good fences make good neighbors. I'll see you next time.